Lucas had always had a gift for remembering the smallest details. He could recite entire conversations from weeks ago. He could recall the name of someone he had only met once. It was why his career as an investigative journalist had taken off. He was always ahead of the game, picking up on nuances others missed. But lately, something had changed. Little lapses had started to appear in his memory. At first, it was just trivial things. Where he'd left his keys. What he'd had for lunch the day before. He blamed it on work stress. The industry was more competitive than ever, and the stories demanded complete dedication. The pressure to be the first to expose scandals consumed him. But after a few weeks, these lapses became more frequent. And worse. One morning, he was having coffee with Mark, a colleague from the newsroom. It was a casual break amid the chaos of deadlines. They were talking about the old days when Mark brought up the party from last week. Lucas blinked, confused. What party? Mark looked at him as if he were joking. Rachel's party. You were there, man. You even helped clean up after the whole mess started. Lucas's mind went blank. He didn't remember any party. Not seeing Rachel. Not helping clean up. He smiled, thinking it was some kind of joke. But Mark continued, describing events he couldn't even imagine. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Back at the office, Lucas tried to brush it off. But the uneasy feeling grew. When he opened his email, there was a message with a provocative subject. Did you forget? It was from Rachel, thanking him for helping at the party and apologizing for the mess afterward. Lucas stared at the screen, his mind racing for a memory that simply wasn't there. He searched his thoughts, but all he found was an irritating void. In the following days, other small events started to pile up. Colleagues mentioned conversations he didn't remember having. Commitments he couldn't recall making. He kept telling himself it was just fatigue. That he needed a break. But something inside him insisted that something was off. That's when he decided to focus more on the brain chip he had implanted a few months earlier. The device, one of the latest innovations from Silicon Valley, promised to boost cognitive functions and enhance memory. The installation had been simple. No complications. The initial results were impressive. He could remember tiny details from meetings and interviews with almost photographic clarity. The chip had helped him on several stories, allowing Lucas to become one of the most respected journalists in the newsroom. However, now he was beginning to question if the chip was working as it should. Were these memory lapses normal? Or was something more sinister happening? The doubt gnawed at him with every new gap in his memory. During a meeting at the office, Lucas tried to focus on what others were saying. But his mind wandered. Fragments of past conversations floated in his head, like they were trying to rearrange themselves. He began doubting his own perceptions. His colleagues' words seemed distant. And suddenly he didn't know what was real or just a construction of his confused mind. Mark invited him out after the meeting, but Lucas declined. He needed time alone. Time to think. As he walked back to his apartment, a growing uneasiness gnawed at him. Was he losing his mind? Or was something wrong with the technology that was supposed to enhance it? On the way, he remembered that he had never really looked into the deeper effects of the chip. He had assumed everything was fine, as most people did with advanced technology. Maybe it was time to reconsider those assumptions. When he got home, Lucas collapsed onto the couch and grabbed his phone. The screen flashed with several notifications, but one, in particular, caught his attention. It was a news article about a recent study questioning the safety of brain chips. He clicked on it quickly. The article talked about some people who reported malfunctions with the chip, but nothing related to memory. Most of the problems seemed superficial, like functionality tweaks. Still, it sparked his paranoia. In the days that followed, Lucas withdrew from his friends and plunged into research. He wanted to believe it was just exaggeration. But the more he uncovered, the more his unease grew. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became that the company behind the technology wasn't as transparent as it appeared. There were rumors in obscure forums that the chip didn't just enhance memories but could alter them. The idea seemed absurd. How could they manipulate memories? And why? But as the days passed, Lucas felt more and more disconnected from his own mind. The void where his memories should have been was growing, and he began to wonder if he could trust his own recollections. What had started as discomfort had transformed into full-blown paranoia. He needed to figure out what was happening to his mind before he completely lost control over it. The next morning, Lucas was startled by a call from his editor. It was early, which meant something urgent was about to happen. When he answered, the voice on the other end sounded hurried, almost impatient. "Lucas, the story is ready to go. We're just waiting for your final approval," Kathy, his editor, said, her tone almost celebratory. Lucas hesitated. He had no idea what she was talking about. "What story?" he asked, feeling his stomach tighten. "Don't joke, Lucas. The interview you did with the former SciTech director. This is going to blow up. Do you realize what we're about to publish?" Lucas stayed silent. SciTech was the company behind the chip he had implanted. Apparently, he had conducted an interview with someone from inside the company. But he had no memory of it. No meeting. No conversation. No plan for such a story. Everything was a blur. "You still there?" He swallowed hard. "Yeah. I'm just thinking about some final tweaks." "Great. We need them by the end of the day. Keep an eye on your emails." He hung up the phone and tried to understand how he could have conducted such an important interview and not remember a single thing. He rushed to his computer and opened his work files. Among them was the document containing the transcript of the interview. The name of the interviewee was Ryan Porter, a former SciTech director who had left the company under mysterious circumstances a few months earlier. Porter's responses detailed how the brain chip wasn't just a tool for enhancement but something that could be manipulated to alter users' perceptions and memories. Lucas read the transcript once, twice, 3 times. It seemed like he had asked the questions. His signature style was there. But he couldn't remember speaking to Porter. In fact, he couldn't remember starting this investigation at all. Trying to piece events together, Lucas scoured his emails and messages, but nothing filled in the gaps in his memory. It was as if part of his life had been erased. The more he tried to remember, the more anxious he became. How could he have conducted an interview with such a crucial source and not recall any of it? He grabbed his phone and tried calling Porter, hoping that a direct conversation might jog some memories loose. But the call went straight to voicemail. Desperate, Lucas began reviewing his old notes, and the more he read, the more disturbed he became. The entire story revolved around SciTech and the possible manipulation of people's memories. Every sentence he read only deepened his discomfort, as if the revelations weren't just journalistic but personal. Was he being manipulated too? Lucas went into the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked normal, but he began to question his own reality. Was it all in his head? Was he imagining it? Or was the chip playing with his perception? He touched his head where the implant was located and felt a slight discomfort. Paranoia started creeping in. What if everything he remembered was being distorted? What if his memories of important events, close relationships, and defining moments were contaminated by an invisible interference? When he returned to his desk, Lucas saw a new message on his computer. It was from Kathy. "We need to move fast. This story will blow up. All the credit will be yours. This is going to be the story of the year." But Lucas didn't feel excited. On the contrary, something inside him screamed to stop, to pull back and reevaluate everything before moving forward. He needed answers. And those answers, he knew, weren't in his files but somewhere inside SciTech. Or maybe inside his own head. He tried calling Ryan Porter again, but once more, there was no answer. The man had disappeared. This only heightened his nerves. The more Lucas searched, the more voids he found. He was beginning to believe this was all beyond his comprehension. What had happened to him over the past few weeks? How could he have conducted such a deep investigation and simply forgotten? In the end, Lucas made a decision. He needed to get to the bottom of this. Whether he remembered or not, he couldn't ignore the fact that he was in the middle of something far bigger than he'd imagined. He opened his computer and started drafting an email to Kathy. He needed to delay the story. He needed more time to figure out what was really going on. But as he finished typing, a new notification popped up. It was a direct message from SciTech. "We know what you forgot. Move forward with the story, and you'll get all the answers you're looking for." His heart raced. How did they know he was working on the story? How did they know about his memory lapses? Suddenly, it felt like there was no escape. SciTech was watching. They knew. They knew everything. Lucas felt the weight of the situation pulling him down even further. The pieces weren't fitting together, and now he was sure that his own mind was in jeopardy. The story that promised to be his greatest achievement now seemed to be the harbinger of his personal downfall. He closed the laptop, trying to control his breathing. The words from the message echoed in his mind, "We know what you forgot." And for the first time, Lucas wondered if he truly wanted to know what he had lost. The next few hours were a blur for Lucas. He couldn't shake the message from SciTech out of his head. It echoed like a silent alarm. "We know what you forgot." Those words repeated themselves, growing louder in his mind. He knew he needed to investigate, to figure out what was really happening to him, but the fear of digging deeper was paralyzing. Back at the office, Lucas tried to focus on other assignments, but every time he looked at the clock, he was reminded that he was running out of time. The SciTech story was about to go public, and if it did without him understanding the truth behind it, there was no telling what the consequences might be. What did SciTech know about him? How had they accessed his mind and his memory? He couldn't ignore the seriousness of the situation anymore. He had to find out what was going on with the chip and why his memories were vanishing. He decided to start with the basics. He opened a new document on his computer and began listing everything he knew about SciTech and the brain chip. What had once seemed like a revolutionary technological innovation now sent chills down his spine. Every time he thought about the implant, he wondered what else they might have placed inside his head. As he read more about the company, he realized there was little information publicly available. SciTech had a strict policy of secrecy surrounding its developments, and any relevant data was hidden behind vague and evasive terms. He began to question why he hadn't noticed this earlier. As a journalist, he had always been meticulous in his research, but it seemed that this time, something had kept him from seeing the obvious. Was this selective blindness another effect of the chip? Had his critical thinking been manipulated along with his memories? Determined to dig deeper, Lucas began lurking on forums and discussion groups online. In those spaces, he found accounts of other people who had used SciTech's brain chip. At first, most described benefits similar to those he had experienced: increased memory capacity, improved focus, and heightened productivity. But as he delved further, he came across disturbing reports. Some people mentioned memory lapses, just like he had been experiencing. Others, however, described something worse: memories they didn't recognize as their own. They remembered events that had never happened, conversations they knew they hadn't had. It was as if someone was implanting these memories in their minds, making it impossible to distinguish real from fabricated. Reading these accounts made Lucas feel less alone, but it also deepened his fear. What else could be at play? Were his memories really his own, or had he too become a victim of implanted memories? The SciTech chip was far more than just a cognitive enhancement tool. And he had no idea how to control or reverse its effects. Lucas decided he needed more answers. Searching the internet would only take him so far. He needed something more concrete. He resolved to find Ryan Porter, the former SciTech director whom he had supposedly interviewed. If anyone could shed light on what was happening to his mind, it was Porter. After some extensive digging, Lucas managed to track down an address linked to Ryan Porter. It was a modest house in a suburban area a few miles outside the city. Without hesitating, he grabbed his keys and drove there. The sun was setting when he arrived, the sky glowing in a deep orange hue. As he approached the house, he noticed the windows were shut, the curtains drawn. No lights were on inside. Everything looked abandoned. Lucas rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. He rang again, this time more forcefully. Still no sign of life. He knocked on the door, a hollow sound that reverberated through the silent house. Just as he was about to give up, he heard the sound of a lock turning. The door opened slowly, revealing a middle-aged man with tired features. His eyes seemed to scan Lucas up and down, wary, but after a moment, they softened. "You must be Lucas," the man said, his voice hoarse and weak, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Lucas nodded, unsure of what to say. The tension in the air was palpable. Porter gestured for him to come in, and Lucas complied. The interior of the house was as dim as the outside, with little furniture, heavy curtains, and a disarray that suggested the place hadn't been cared for in some time. Porter motioned to a chair in the living room, and Lucas sat down. "What do you want to know?" Porter asked, breaking the silence. The question, though simple, carried a weight that Lucas wasn't prepared to handle. He hesitated before answering. "Why can't I remember talking to you?" Porter let out a deep sigh and shook his head, as if he had been expecting that question all along. "Because you don't remember a lot of things, Lucas. And you're not the only 1 inch." Porter's words hit Lucas like a stone in the pit of his stomach. This was the beginning of a revelation he feared but knew was inevitable. SciTech, the chip, his memories, it was all connected in ways far more complex than he had imagined. And Porter seemed to know exactly what was at stake. The conversation with Ryan Porter echoed in Lucas's mind as he drove back home that night. The words "you're not the only one" reverberated, dark and heavy with implications he still couldn't fully process. Porter had hinted at something vague, something about the SciTech chip having a hidden function, but he refused to give more details. He was clearly afraid, that much was evident. Every answer he gave carried a tone of caution, as if he were being monitored, and when Lucas pushed for more, Porter shut down completely. The only thing Lucas got from him was a cryptic warning: be careful what you try to remember. At first, it made no sense. But as Lucas drove home, it started to click. The chip wasn't just interfering with his memories, it was possibly distorting his entire perception of reality. He began to wonder if everything he'd experienced over the last few months, the memory lapses, the conversations, the SciTech investigation, was real or merely a creation of the device in his mind. And even more terrifying was the realization that he wasn't alone. How many others were going through the same thing? By the time he got back to his apartment, Lucas felt the weight of uncertainty mounting. He slammed the door shut and locked it quickly before collapsing onto the couch. He grabbed his phone and opened his email, where the transcript of his interview with Porter still awaited his final approval for publication. He read through it again, hoping something might jump out, some clue to piece together the puzzle in his head. But the more he read, the less sense it made. How could he have conducted that interview if he didn't even remember being in the same room with Porter? He decided to test the reality around him. He needed some confirmation that his perception was still intact. Something that could be measured, something undeniable. He grabbed a small to-do list he had written a few days ago, simple, everyday tasks like grocery shopping and picking up laundry. Each item had a small checkmark beside it, indicating it had been done. At least that was something concrete. But as he looked at the list, something bothered him. 2 of the items were marked as done, but he had no memory of going to the grocery store or picking up his laundry. No matter how hard he tried to force it, those memories simply weren't there. He went to the kitchen and opened the fridge, expecting to see the groceries. Nothing. The shelves were bare. The confirmation of what Porter had hinted at hit Lucas like a ton of bricks. His memories were being manipulated. The feeling of having completed tasks, of finishing daily routines, was as real as any other memory, but now he had proof that they hadn't happened. It was the beginning of a nightmare. If he couldn't trust his own memories, what could he believe? Lucas felt the urgency rising inside him. He needed a second opinion, someone who could validate or invalidate his perception. He tried calling Mark, the colleague who had mentioned the party, but the phone rang with no answer. Desperate, he decided to drive over to Mark's apartment. He needed to confirm whether at least that conversation, the one that had triggered all of this, was real. It took him less than 15 minutes to get to Mark's building, and he rushed up the stairs. He knocked on the door, but there was no response. He knocked again, harder this time, and heard footsteps approaching. The door opened just a crack, and Mark's tired face appeared. He looked surprised to see Lucas, but also a little wary. "Lucas? What are you doing here this late? I need to talk to you about Rachel's party. I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Mark stared at him, confused. "Man, we've already talked about this. Why do you keep insisting? You were there. We were all there. What more do you want to know?" Lucas tried to stay calm, but his mind was on the verge of collapse. "I don't remember any of it. None of the party, none of what happened after. I need to know, Mark, did it really happen? Or is it something that I'm imagining?" Mark furrowed his brow and took a step back, like he was dealing with someone on the brink of madness. "Lucas, are you okay? You're acting different. Maybe you've been working too much? Could just be stress." Mark's response didn't help. If anything, it deepened Lucas's terror. The way Mark spoke, the way he looked at him, was laced with a surface-level concern, like he was reading from a rehearsed script. It was as if the answers Lucas was receiving weren't coming from a real person but from an echo manipulated by SciTech itself. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath him. He couldn't trust even his friends. And worse, he couldn't trust his own mind. Suddenly, Mark's apartment felt claustrophobic, and Lucas backed away quickly. Mark stood in the doorway, watching him leave. There was no protest, no attempt to stop his friend. Just a vague, silent stare that only deepened Lucas's doubts. Back in his car, Lucas sat for a long time, breathing deeply, trying to organize his thoughts. It was clear that he couldn't rely on anyone to validate his experiences. He was alone in this, trapped in a cycle of distress and uncertainty, unable to tell what was real and what was fabricated. When he got home, Lucas sat back down on the couch, staring into space. He knew that from this point forward, his investigation would have to be much more careful. If he couldn't trust his own memories, he would have to find another way to get to the truth. And that's when he started planning his next move, finding out how to access the hidden files inside the chip. If there was any place where answers were stored, it would be there, locked away in some obscure part of his mind, blocked by a technology he was only beginning to understand. It was almost midnight when Lucas, exhausted from battling his own uncertainty, made a decision. If anyone could give him answers, it had to be Kathy, his editor. She was too deeply involved in the SciTech story, and her insistence on running it, despite all the inconsistencies Lucas had uncovered, was far too suspicious to ignore. Somehow, she knew more than she was letting on. He picked up the phone and, without thinking too much, called Kathy. The phone rang for a while until she finally answered. Her voice sounded surprised, but not alarmed. "Lucas? What's going on? It's late, unless you've got an update on the story." Lucas tried to stay calm, but there was a tension in his voice that he couldn't hide. "We need to talk. Now. Can you meet me at the office?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "Now? At this hour?" "Lucas, can't it wait until morning? You need rest, and so do I." "No. This can't wait." Another silence followed, and Lucas could almost hear Kathy weighing her options. When she finally spoke, there was a resigned tone in her voice. "All right. I'll see you in half an hour." Lucas left his apartment and drove to the office in silence, his heart pounding. The city was almost deserted, the lights from the buildings casting strange shadows across the empty streets. When he arrived at the newsroom, the building looked like a ghost of itself, completely quiet. He entered and headed to the conference room, where he knew Kathy would meet him. A few minutes later, she appeared, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Her expression was cautious, as if she already sensed something was off. She sat across from Lucas, her hands folded on the table, not saying a word. Lucas didn't waste time. "What's going on, Kathy? What's your real involvement with SciTech?" Kathy stared at him for a long moment, not blinking. "Are you accusing me of something, Lucas?" "I'm asking questions, and I want answers. Is SciTech controlling my memories? Why don't I remember interviewing Porter? And why are you so determined to publish this story when you know something is wrong?" She sighed, and for a moment, Lucas thought she would deflect. But then something shifted in her posture. Kathy relaxed a little, as if she decided it wasn't worth fighting anymore. "I knew this moment was coming," she said, her voice firm but carrying a tone of exhaustion. "You weren't supposed to be asking these questions, Lucas. SciTech did a pretty good job making sure you wouldn't remember certain things. But it seems like it doesn't always work as planned." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. "So it's true. My memories, they've been manipulated?" "Yes," Kathy admitted bluntly. SciTech developed the chip to do more than just enhance memory. They can erase, alter, even implant memories. And you were a key part of their plan. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Plan? What plan?" "The plan to manipulate information on a large scale," Kathy continued, her voice calm, as if explaining something simple. "They didn't just want to enhance people's cognitive abilities. They wanted to test how far they could control what people believed to be true. You, Lucas, were chosen because your reputation as a journalist would make anything coming from you accepted without question. SciTech needed someone like you to spread the stories they wanted the public to believe. Lucas felt the room spin. Everything he had been suspecting was being confirmed all at once. Psytech had been using him as a tool, controlling his memories and his actions without him even realizing it. "Why me?" Lucas asked, his voice breaking. "Why me?" Kathy looked him directly in the eyes, her expression steady. "Because you were perfect. Smart, respected, but vulnerable enough to trust the chip blindly. And you did exactly what they wanted. You started the investigation, you began writing the story. All part of the plan. They just made sure you wouldn't remember certain parts of that investigation so you wouldn't question what you were doing." Lucas's head shook in disbelief. "And you? You're part of this too?" Kathy hesitated before answering. "I knew, yes. I knew everything. But, Lucas, it's not like you're imagining. I was pressured, manipulated too. Psytech has its tentacles everywhere. They control more than you can possibly imagine. And once you're in it, it's hard to get out. Very hard." Lucas's world was collapsing. He had trusted Kathy, believed she was on his side. But now, all that was left was the feeling of betrayal. She was part of the conspiracy, which meant he really couldn't trust anyone anymore. "So what now?" he asked, his voice filled with anger and despair. "Do they expect me to go along with this? To publish the story and help spread their lies?" Kathy shook her head slowly. "You don't have a choice, Lucas. Psytech doesn't leave loose ends. If you try to go against them, they'll erase you. Literally. They'll wipe your mind, your thoughts. And no one will even remember who you were." Her warning was clear. He was trapped in a web he hadn't even known existed. His memories, his career, even his identity were all in Psytech's hands, and now he had to decide what to do next. The conversation with Kathy left Lucas in shock. His mind was trying to process everything, but it felt like a whirlwind of confusion. How had he been manipulated so easily? How had his life been turned upside down without him even realizing it? Worse, now he knew his memories couldn't be trusted. Psytech had been tampering with his mind like it was a simple computer file. But what else had they changed? What else had he forgotten? Leaving the office, Lucas felt the night air rush into his lungs, but it offered no relief. The streets were eerily silent. The only sound was his footsteps echoing through the emptiness, like the city was caught in a terrifying pause, waiting for something to explode. He needed a plan, something to escape Psytech's control, but the urgency to act was crushed by the lack of options. They were everywhere, in every aspect of his life. As Lucas walked further down the streets, the city lights seemed more distant, dimmer, as if something was wrong. Turning a corner, he stumbled upon a group of people huddled together, all staring at their phones with wide-eyed expressions of shock. Curious, he moved closer to listen. Whispers of panic and confusion filled the air. Some were crying, others looked like they were in shock. "Did you see this? They're lying to us," a woman screamed, clutching her phone tightly, her eyes wild with fear. "None of this happened." "I know it didn't happen." The people around her murmured in agreement. Lucas edged even closer, trying to make sense of what was happening. A young woman nearby, her eyes filled with tears, was talking about a false memory she had of a horrible accident involving her sister, an accident that she now knew had never happened. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing to everyone that their memories were being manipulated. Suddenly, it all began to make sense to Lucas. It wasn't just him. Psytech wasn't controlling the minds of just a few people. This was happening on a much larger scale. The people around him were starting to realize, one by one, that their memories were also being tampered with. The memories they trusted to guide their lives, their decisions, their relationships, everything was a carefully constructed lie. Chaos in the streets was just beginning. Lucas watched as the murmurs turned into shouts. The crowd, once just confused, was now on the brink of hysteria. People started running, pushing, screaming that they were being deceived. "We can't trust anything," a man's voice boomed from the crowd, echoing the fear that everyone seemed to share. Lucas began to back away, trying to distance himself from the growing chaos. But the further he walked, the more he realized that the panic wasn't confined to one place. As he moved through deserted streets, every block seemed to be filled with small groups of people, all displaying signs of terror and confusion. What had SciTech done? How had they let the situation spiral so far out of control? He began to understand that the problem wasn't just with him, or even with his story. This was something much bigger, a cascading effect, hitting hundreds, maybe thousands of people. The manipulated memories were crumbling, and the brutal truth was being revealed. And it was triggering a widespread collapse. SciTech, however, wasn't just any company. They had the resources and the power not only to control people's minds but to control how they reacted to the truth. Lucas knew that the chaos on the streets was just the beginning. The mass hysteria he was seeing in the microcosm of his city would soon spread to other places. He had to do something, find a way to stop it before it was too late. Quickening his pace, Lucas decided to head back to his apartment. He needed to gather anything that could help him protect himself, notes, files, any evidence that could expose what SciTech was doing. If he could get the truth out somehow, maybe there would be a chance to stop the company. But at the same time, he knew that doing so would put him in even greater danger. If SciTech was willing to manipulate memories, what would they do when someone tried to expose their secrets? On his way back, Lucas heard the sound of distant sirens. The authorities were beginning to respond, but he knew he couldn't trust them. If SciTech could manipulate people's minds, what would stop them from infiltrating the government itself? Back in his apartment, Lucas rushed in and locked the door behind him. His breathing was heavy, his heart pounding. He needed a plan, needed to think about how to get out of this. The sirens outside sounded closer now, the screams of people echoing through the streets, a constant reminder that chaos was lurking, ready to explode at any moment. Lucas opened his laptop and began digging through his files, searching for something, anything that could provide answers. Every click seemed to echo in the silent room as he tried to find a clue, a loophole he could use against SciTech. Time was running out. He knew the company wouldn't wait long before making their next move, and when they did, he would be the next to disappear from reality, just like his memories. But one thing was clear. Lucas wasn't going down without a fight. The apartment was filled with silence, except for the sound of keys clicking as Lucas frantically searched through his files, desperately looking for anything that could help him understand how SciTech was controlling people. The sirens outside echoed, but now they felt distant, drowned out by the urgency of his mission. Chaos had taken over the streets, and Lucas knew he didn't have much time before the situation became irreversible. As he sifted through folders and documents on his laptop, a dark thought began to form. What if the control SciTech exerted over people's minds wasn't just a side effect of the chip, but part of a larger experiment, a test for something even more sinister? He remembered Kathy's words about how he had been chosen because of his influence as a journalist. This wasn't just about manipulating memories, it was about controlling narratives, shaping people's reality according to SciTech's desires. It was a kind of power Lucas could barely comprehend, but he knew it was real. Finally, after hours of frantic searching, he found something. Among the encrypted files, there was a document he didn't remember saving. The title, simple and cryptic, made his stomach drop. Project Remembrance, Phase 3. Lucas opened the file with trembling hands and started to read. The words on the screen confirmed his worst fears. The document detailed an experiment that SciTech had been conducting for years, using the brain chip as a tool to test the limits of mind control. But there was something even more disturbing. Phase 3 referred to the large-scale implementation of a new software that didn't just alter memories, but could implant completely fabricated experiences, making people believe in realities that had never existed. And the worst part? The final test was happening right now, in the streets, in real time. People were living through false memories on a massive scale, believing in events that never happened, and it was creating chaos. The ultimate goal of SciTech wasn't just to enhance memory, it was to create a new form of total control, where they could manipulate entire populations at will, fabricating crises, solutions, and even leaders, all based on a narrative constructed digitally in their minds. Lucas felt a wave of panic surge through his body. Everything that was happening in the streets, the people breaking down, unable to tell what was real. It was SciTech's plan in action. He now knew too much, and somehow, he could perceive what others couldn't. The chip, for some reason, wasn't completely blocking his awareness. He had to do something. He had to warn the world before the situation got completely out of hand. With this new understanding, Lucas knew that the next step would be risky. He had to confront SciTech directly, and the only way to do that was to find the person responsible for developing the software. If he could disable the system that was sending out the false memories, maybe he could stop the collapse that was looming. But how could he get into SciTech? They were everywhere, and by now, they must have known Lucas was aware of their plans. The risk of being intercepted before he could make any progress was high, but Lucas didn't have a choice. He had to try. That's when an encrypted message appeared on his screen. The sender was unknown, but the subject line made Lucas freeze. "I know how to stop them." He hesitated for a second before clicking on the message. The body of the email was short and to the point. "If you want answers, come to the address below. But come alone. We don't have much time." Below, there was an address in an industrial part of the city. Lucas looked at the clock. It was nearly dawn. The chaos in the streets hadn't yet reached its peak, but he knew it was only a matter of time before things became uncontrollable. SciTech had its claws in everything, his memories, his mind, and now, potentially, his survival. But Lucas felt that this was his only option. He grabbed his keys, threw on a jacket, and left his apartment, his heart pounding as he drove toward the unknown address. The industrial district where the address was located was desolate, a forgotten area that seemed perfect for a clandestine meeting. When he arrived at the spot, a small, abandoned workshop, the silence was overwhelming. Lucas stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as his footsteps echoed off the empty walls. "You came," a voice said from the shadows. Lucas turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness. It was Ryan Porter. Lucas froze, his mind racing. "You sent the message?" Porter nodded slowly. "I knew you'd get here eventually. They couldn't keep you in the dark forever, Lucas. And now, you need to understand what's really at stake." Porter began to explain that SciTech's project was only the first phase of something much larger. Controlling memories was just the beginning. The next stage involved using their technology to induce specific behaviors on a massive scale. Not just creating false memories, but controlling how people reacted to those memories, shaping their actions and decisions. They're trying to create a controlled society where everything we believe, everything we remember, is carefully fabricated by them, Porter said. And the worst part is, by now, most people can't even tell the difference between the truth and the fiction. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on him like a wall. SciTech was closer to total control than he had ever imagined. Porter looked at him with a grave expression. "But there's still a chance. We can shut down the server that's emitting the control signals. It's hidden in SciTech's headquarters, and with the right help, we can neutralize it. Lucas knew he was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of his life. But at the same time, this was his only chance to save people, to bring the truth back to a reality that was on the verge of being destroyed. Ryan Porter's words echoed in Lucas's mind as they drove toward the center of the city. The SciTech headquarters, with its sleek and neutral facade, concealed the epicenter of the collapse unfolding in the streets. The revelation that there was a central server, hidden inside the company, emitting signals to manipulate memories on a massive scale, was terrifying. And now, they had one objective: shut down the system before the chaos became irreversible. The car stopped a few blocks away from the SciTech building. Porter explained that security would be tight. SciTech knew something was wrong, and with the streets on the brink of total collapse, they were likely on high alert. Still, the company's corporate facade and discreet operations allowed most people to remain oblivious to what was happening inside. It was the perfect moment to act, but also the most dangerous. As Lucas stepped out of the car, he looked at the horizon where the sun was starting to hide behind the buildings. The chaos in the streets seemed distant for a brief moment, muffled by the adrenaline of the mission ahead. He knew there was no room for mistakes. Porter led him to a side entrance, an old maintenance access they hoped wouldn't be monitored. The plan was simple but daring: infiltrate the server room, upload the code Porter had developed, and shut down the system controlling the memories. However, the path ahead would be difficult. SciTech security systems were sophisticated, and any misstep could result in disastrous consequences for both Lucas and everyone else. Entering the building was surprisingly easy. The tensions outside, with the streets on the verge of collapse, had distracted most of the security. As they moved through the empty halls, Lucas could feel the tension building. The white, sterilized walls of the building, once a symbol of technological innovation, now felt like a claustrophobic prison, echoing the power SciTech held over people's minds. When they reached the server room, Porter stopped in front of the door. There was a security panel, protected by a biometric identification system. He glanced at Lucas with a grim expression. It's now or never. With the tools he had brought, Porter managed to bypass the security system. The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a large, cold room filled with equipment that blinked with rhythmic lights. The center of SciTech's mind control. The heart of everything. Lucas followed Porter inside, watching the servers hum with an invisible energy, sending out signals that shaped the reality of millions of people. Everything looked so banal, so ordinary, yet it was the embodiment of the absolute power SciTech sought. Porter went straight to the main control panel and began working. His hands moved quickly, inputting commands and accessing the system's files. Meanwhile, Lucas kept an eye on the security cameras, praying that no one would intercept them before they completed their mission. Almost there, Porter murmured as he entered the final sequence. When I give the signal, you'll need to confirm the code at the other terminal. Lucas moved to the designated terminal, his heart racing. He knew that shutting down the system would be an act of salvation, but it also carried immense risk. If they failed, SciTech would discover that they had tried to destroy the operation, and the consequences would be unimaginable. Porter looked over at Lucas and nodded. Now. Lucas typed in the code and hit the confirmation button. A soft hum of deactivation echoed through the room, and the blinking lights on the servers began to shut down slowly, one by one. A sense of relief almost washed over Lucas, but it was interrupted when Porter called out, his voice tense. Lucas, we've got a problem. Lucas rushed over to Porter's panel. The code had worked, but the main system was resisting a full shutdown. Something was blocking the complete deactivation. Whatever it was preventing the entire program from collapsing. If we don't shut this down now, it'll reboot and come back even stronger. We need to do it manually, Porter explained, his expression grim. Lucas understood what that meant. To shut down the system manually, someone would have to physically enter the server cores, remove the security blocks, and risk their own life in the process. It was a last-ditch effort, desperate and dangerous. "I'll do it," Lucas said, determined. Porter tried to talk him out of it, but Lucas knew it was their only option. If SciTech regained control, everything he had done would be for nothing. The people would remain trapped in a false reality, unable to distinguish truth from lies. Lucas moved toward the core servers, his fingers trembling as he removed the security plates. Following Porter's distant instructions, he began disabling the systems one by one. The heat from the equipment radiated through the room, and the tension mounted with every second. Finally, Lucas reached the main core, the last barrier keeping the program active. With one final pull, the system powered down completely. The silence that followed was deafening. The lights on the servers were off, and the only sound Lucas could hear was his own breathing. He returned to the control panel, where Porter was waiting, his face showing a look of relief. "We did it." Lucas walked out of the room with Porter, feeling the weight of the moment. For now, SciTech had been stopped. The chaos in the streets, the false memories, it would all start to fade. But the fight wasn't over. Lucas knew that even without the system, SciTech was still powerful. And the truth about the mind control they had exerted still needed to be exposed. As they made their way back to the car, Lucas looked up at the sky, where the sun was starting to set again. The chaos in the streets was far from over, but there was hope. He had done his part, and now, the truth was finally free for everyone to discover. But even as he headed home, one last doubt lingered in his mind. What if, somehow, all of this had also been a fabricated memory?